running a block of code over and over again via a construct known as a loop is also a very common scenario in programming. And Python provides a couple of ways of doing it, which we're going to take a look at now. So in the editor, let's go ahead and open up loops_start. And you can see here I've got a function called main and a variable named x, which I'm initializing to 0. So let's start by taking a look at the while loop. So I'm going to write the while statement, and then inside parentheses I'm going to write x is less than 5, and then I'll have a colon, which defines the scope block of my while statement. I'm going to print x, and then I'm going to have x become equal to x plus 1. So once again, you can see that the code in the while loop is indented to indicate that it belongs to the scope of the loop. A while loop executes a block of code while a particular condition evaluates true. So in this case, while x is less than 5, we're going to print the value of x, and then we're going to increment x by 1. Now, some other languages like C, for example, provide a whole bunch of ways of writing loops. Python likes to keep things simple. It's only got 2 ways of doing loops. There's the while loop, and there's the for loop. So we'll get to the for loop in a moment, but for now, let's just take a look at the while loop. So we'll save this, and let's run it. And you can see that x starts out as 0, so it prints 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then it increments to 5, and then when the value of x becomes 5, x is no longer less than 5, so the loop terminates. So now let's try our for loop. To write a for loop, I'm going to use the keyword for, and then I'm going to define a variable named x in the range between 5 and 10. And I'm going to print x. All right, and let's go ahead and comment out these previous lines. For loops in Python work a little bit differently than you might be used to seeing in other languages. So some languages like JavaScript and C and Java, they have this concept of an index variable that counts the number of iterations in the for loop. So for example, in JavaScript, you might see something that looks like this. You'll have like, 4 and then I equals 0, and then I is less than 5, and then I plus plus. Okay, so you got 4, right? And then I is 0. So this is the initialization part, and then this is the conditional part, and then this is the incremental part. Python works a little bit differently than this. Rather than having an index variable, right, we have what's called an iterator. In this case, I have x loop over a range of numbers. And to get that range of numbers, I'm using the built-in range function. So I have a range going from 5 to 10, and I'm going to print x each time. So it's probably easier to understand this once you've seen it in action. So let's go ahead and save this and run it. And you can see in the output, right, it prints out 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then when it gets to 10, it stops. Okay, so you've got x within the range, which is not inclusive of the 10 right here. So it excludes the outside number, so it only prints 5 through 9. But for loops operate over sets of things, not just numbers. So let's try something else. You can see here that I've got a variable named days, and I'm initializing it to a list of abbreviated day names, right? So I've got opening and closing brackets, and inside the brackets I've got strings of my day names. So this example has nothing to do with numbers. In this case, my for loop is going to iterate over each element in the days list. So to do that, what I'll do is I'll write for d in the name of the collection. In this case, it's days. And then once again, I'll have my colon, and inside the loop, I'll print d. And let me comment out this previous example. All right, so let's go ahead and save this and run it. And when I run it, you can see it's printing out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so on up to Sunday. So it's looping over the contents of the list right here. Again, no index counter involved. It's just iterating over the members of a list. All right, let's keep on going. So let's take a look at using the break and continue statements. So what I'm going to do is copy the for loop that I had previously and paste it here. I'm going to uncomment this, and I'll comment the previous example. So this is the same for loop that we had earlier where we have x in the range of 5 to 10. But we're going to do 2 different things. So first, let's look at the break statement. The break statement is used to break the execution of a loop if a condition is met or for some other reason. So I'm going to put a statement in here that says if x is equal to 7, then break. Right. So in this case, when x gets to be the value of 7, then the break statement will execute and it will cause the for loop to terminate. So let's go ahead and save and run this. And you can see that that's what's happening, right? So this time, instead of going all the way to 9, it prints out 5 and 6, and then it gets to the 7. And then when it gets to the 7, this break statement kicks in and terminates the loop, so it never gets to print 7, 8, or 9. Okay, so let's go back. Now let's take a look at the continue statement. I'm going to add a continue statement. I'm going to write if x %2 is equal to 0, then continue. And I'll just comment out the break statement, all right? So in this case, my code says if x modulo 2 is equal to 0, in other words, take x divided by 2, and if the value left over is equal to 0, then continue. And continue means skip the rest of the code inside the loop, and then just go back up to the top and do the next iteration. Now, the rest of the loop, in this case, is just this print statement. It's only one statement. But if there were more statements here, they would all be skipped. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this, and let's run it. Right. And now you can see that only 5, 7, and 9 are being printed, because what's happening is if it says if x is %2 is equal to 0, so if I have an even number, right, it's not going to print 6 or 8, because the continue statement is going to execute and then go back up to the top and do the next iteration while skipping that particular print statement. Okay, let's take one more example of using loops. So let's go back up and revisit the loop that we had up here, where we're looping over these days. So I'm going to copy this line, paste it down here, and uncomment it. And I'll comment out the previous example. Right. Now, remember earlier, I said that normally the for loop in Python does not use an index variable, right? There's no loop counter normally. Well, you can get one if you really need it. So here's what you do. I'm going to write for I, d, so a tuple of values, right? So there's 2 values here, in, and then I'm going to use the enumerate function. And I'm going to enumerate the days list. I'm going to print both I and d, okay? So the enumerate function will iterate over this collection, just like the for loop normally would. But in addition to returning the value of the item that's being looked at, it also returns a value that is the index of the item in question. So the enumerate function is going to return 2 values. It's going to return the index and the number of the collection that we're looking at. And here I'm printing out both of these, the index and the item, right? So let's save, and let's run it. And you can see that I'm getting 0 Monday, 1 Tuesday, 2 Wednesday, and so on. So I'm getting the value of the day that's in the collection as well as its numerical index using the enumerate function. So even though you only have the while loop and the for loop in Python, you can see that they're pretty versatile and they take the place of lots of other more fancy loop constructs in other languages.